In the comments of my Zapdos video, there were many mentions of Pokemon with comparable competitive resumes to Zapdos that were released in future generations. Today, we'll take a look at one of the Pokemon most commonly cited as being in contention for the title of most consistent competitive Pokemon ever, Tyranitar. Introduced in Generation 2 as the series' second pseudo-legendary after Dragonite, Tyranitar has never fallen from the OU tier and has always been a significant piece of it. Even at a cursory glance, it's easy to see why. Tyranitar has incredible raw stats. None of its HP, physical defense, or special defense are below base 100, its special attack is higher than average and very capable of making an impact, and its physical attack, upon introduction, tied with Dragonite for being the highest in the game regardless of tier. Go a bit deeper and you'll see that its move pool has always been very diverse, especially by the standards of earlier generations, with it having a bevy of strong physical and special attacks alike, along with notable support moves. Basically, Tyranitar has the ability to play just about any role you could want, always with the option to put a hurting on anyone who doubts its offensive power, even when it's not focused on attacking. But it wasn't until Generation 3 that Tyranitar was able to display the destructive potential its stats clearly showed it to have. In Generation 2, Tyranitar was held back by its move pool for the first and only time, lacking the precious Dragon Dance that would make it an offensive juggernaut in Generations 3 and 4. Here's why that was an issue. Tyranitar's best stab attack to make use of its massive physical attack stat was Rock Slide, which, on its own, is not a great move to be a Pokemon's primary source of offense in singles or doubles. At a base 75 power and 90 accuracy, its only selling point is that it has a 30% chance to make the opponent flinch. That is, so long as you go first. But without a way to mitigate its below average speed stat, Tyranitar didn't see many openings to strike before its opponent. For those of you who don't play older generations, you might be asking about Crunch, which is an 80 base power Dark-type move that Tyranitar also gets a stab boost with. Here's the thing about that. Crunch was a special attack in Generation 2. All Dark-type attacks were. Prior to Generation 4, type was used to determine whether a move was physical or special. That's why you don't see Shadow Ball on the vast majority of old Gengar sets, but do see Ice Punch and Fire Punch. This hurt a good handful of Pokemon in the first 3 generations, including an oddly high number of Dark types. But Tyranitar still had a good special attack stat that prevented it from being hindered all too much. The only move Tyranitar had to boost its physical attack, and thus make Rock Slide more threatening, was Curse, a move that, while boosting your physical attack and physical defense, also lowers your speed. Not something we want with a Pokemon that has multiple, extremely common weaknesses. And yes, I will talk about its weird typing in more depth later in the video. But for now, compare it to Curse variants of Snorlax, who only has one weakness, fighting types. Snorlax also had 3 great options for stab normal type attacks with base powers ranging from 85 to 120. It's easy to see why Snorlax was the force in Generation 2 that Tyranitar would become in Generation 3. Surprisingly, in its first generation of play, this future offensive titan mainly saw use in a utility role, a role it would continue to excel at as the competitive landscape evolved in future generations. With Rock being resistant to normal type attacks, Tyranitar made good use of its access to Roar to force the dominant Snorlax off the field before it boosted too much for teams to handle. But unlike Skarmory, who did the same job, Tyranitar could also pack a punch against many of the tier's most threatening Pokemon. Once Generation 3 gave it access to Dragon Dance, Tyranitar was finally able to show off just how dangerous a Pokemon with its stats could be. Tyranitar followed in the footsteps of Tauros in Generation 1 and Snorlax in Generation 2 by giving the OU tier a definitive best Pokemon in Generation 3. The moveset of Dragon Dance, Rock Slide, Earthquake, and Hidden Power Bug is ruthless. Dragon Dance boosts its stats, making Stab Rock Slide now do really good damage, along with the speed boost making its flinch chance another real threat. Earthquake is for opposing Tyranitar and Pokemon who resist Rock Slide. Hidden Power Bug is almost exclusively used for Celebi and Claydol. There are very few Pokemon in Generation 3 OU that this moveset can't flat out destroy even off of one Dragon Dance. Once Generation 4 made Crunch a physical attack, Hidden Power Bug caught the boot and Tyranitar was finally able to use both of its types with its massive physical attack stat. But also in Generation 4, Rock Slide stopped being a guarantee on Tyranitar following the introduction of Stone Edge. The question of Rock Slide versus Stone Edge can be debated to death, then reincarnated and debated to death again, because while having a base power of 100 and an increased chance to net you a critical hit, Stone Edge is 10% less accurate than Rock Slide. That's a huge difference in competitive Pokemon, where the old saying is, if it's not 100% accurate, it's 0% accurate. People nicknamed it Stone Miss for a reason. Generation 4 also saw the start of Pokemon's official competitive battling format for the video games, the Video Game Championships. Unable to compete in the first two seasons due to it evolving at a higher level than 50 and the auto-leveling system not being in effect yet, Tyranitar was one of a handful of powerful Pokemon banned due to its level alone. But in 2010, in its first year of eligibility and with Pokemon like Kyogre and Groudon legal to be played, there were 3 Tyranitar in the Seniors Division's top 8, including on the second place team. This was back before the Masters Division was a thing, so Senior was the highest division. Tyranitar's relevancy in VGC 2010 is mainly due to its ability. Abilities were introduced in Generation 3, and Tyranitar received Sandstream. This ability summons a sandstorm when Tyranitar enters the field for the first time. In Generations 3, 4, and 5, weather activated by an ability was permanent unless overtaken by either an opposing weather summoning ability or a move like Rain Dance. Weather Wars were a big part of VGC 2010, as is obvious by the combination of Ludicolo and Kyogre being on each of the top 3 Senior Division teams. This made Sandstream a valuable asset when trying to retake control of the field. Starting in Generation 4, Sandstorm also raised the special defense of all Rock-type Pokemon by 1 stage, further adding to Tyranitar's already great bulk. Generation 5 saw Tyranitar return to its Generation 2 roots in single battles, as supportive sets fit the Smogon metagame best. And without a hitch, Tyranitar was able to shift roles seamlessly. Surprisingly, it was helped by the rise of powerful fighting types. which Tyranitar hated, that caused psychic types to become more prominent, which Tyranitar loved. Crunch and Pursuit put a hurting on popular threats like Reuniclus and Latios, who were otherwise very tough to take down. So even when Tyranitar loses, it wins. This is most visible in the VGC results from 2012 and 2013, where, across 16 teams in the highest division, Tyranitar was on half of them. This includes Ray Rizzo's 2012 first place team, which helped him secure a third straight VGC World Championship. No other player has captured more than one world title in the video games, and Jason Klasinski is the only player to do so in the trading card game. As was the case in single battles, many Tyranitar in VGC during this era were supportive and defensive. Ray's Tyranitar invested heavily in its defense, and its attacks were meant to help Ray deal with specific Pokemon, not to have Tyranitar bully its way through the opposing team on its own. Despite getting a Mega Evolution entering Generation 6, normal Tyranitar was still extremely prominent in both singles and doubles. That isn't something that can be said for any other Pokemon except Garchomp and Scissor, two other Pokemon that have had incredible longevity in the top tiers of play. Quick edit, this applies to a few more Pokemon than I initially remembered. Normal versions of Gengar and Salamence got runs in singles since Smogon made their Megas Uber, and both forms of each were popular in VGC at different points, while both forms of both Lottie twins fared pretty well in both formats. Garchomp's Mega actually ended up being worse than its normal version because it lost 10 points of speed upon Mega Evolution. This meant that Mega Garchomp lost the crucial speed war against base 100 Pokemon that normal Garchomp wins. The limitation of one Mega Evolution per battle made players have to be picky with who they chose to be their Mega. With normal Tyranitar already being great, many made the call to go with other options like Mega Pinsir and Mega Charizard Y in singles, while Mega Salamence and Mega Mawile were popular Tyranitar teammates in the VGCs. But it's not like Mega Tyranitar wasn't used. A 10-point boost to its speed was more impactful than you might think. It let Dragon Dance sets be even more effective, as they were able to outspeed critical threats that the normal version couldn't. This worked nicely alongside the 30-point boost it got to its already incredible physical attack stat, and significant increases to both of its defensive stats. The only thing that didn't change about Tyranitar upon Mega Evolution was its ability, which made things interesting. With Weather Wars continuing to be a notable part of competitive play, Mega Evolving with Sandstream was great. Switching in Weather Summoners like Politoed and Mega Charizard Y was how 99% of teams kept their preferred weather active and got rid of yours. Normally, Tyranitar would have to switch out, then switch back in to get Sand up again. But Mega Evolution gets treated in the same way, like your new form is a newly switched in Pokemon. So despite having Sandstream the whole time, the game acts like Mega Tyranitar is a new participant and resets the weather. 2014 US National Champion Alex Ogloza ran Rain Dance on his Politoed, which already sets rain with its ability Drizzle, specifically to counter stuff like this. That's really been the story of Tyranitar. More than anything else, its biggest asset has always been its ability. Once abilities were introduced in Generation 3, Tyranitar made an impact the second it came onto the field, because having Sand set as a weather condition makes you have to approach a battle differently. And at least in Generation 3 OU, there was no counterplay to this, unless you wanted to use Rain Dance or Sunny Day, which most teams didn't need otherwise. Tyranitar was one of only 3 Pokemon given a weather summoning ability in Generation 3. The other 2 were Kyogre and Groudon, both of whom were banned from OU on sight. The constant chip damage from sand adds up quickly and neutralizes leftovers, one of the best items in the game regardless of the generation or format. This is before Tyranitar has ever made a move beyond just switching into battle. Then it becomes a real problem. With a move pool so vast and stats so well rounded, almost any Tyranitar variant can succeed on almost any style of team. More than just about any Pokemon ever, you don't know what you're facing until Tyranitar makes a move. Such long-lasting dominance may seem puzzling, however, as Tyranitar's type combination, defensively, is one of the worst in the game. Tyranitar's Rock-Dark typing makes it weak to 7 of the 18 types, nearly half the field. This includes a 4 times weakness to fighting types and weaknesses to other common types such as ground and water. Most of its resistances aren't as notable as its weaknesses, with flying, poison, and ghost being nowhere near as common across the generations as the previous 3 types. You'd think that to remain top tier for so long, Tyranitar would have consistent ways to counter its major weaknesses. But you'd be wrong. In the best of cases, you can surprise a ground type with Ice Beam and even pick up a KO if that ground type happens to be Garchomp or Landorus. Its options for taking out water types are limited to its stab moves just hitting really hard, and it has nothing to handle fighting types on its own. The fighting type resists both rock and dark type attacks, and Tyranitar doesn't have another attack in its move pool to deal with them. But it's not like covering for Tyranitar's weaknesses is all too difficult. Pokemon is a team game at the end of the day, so you're free to pair it with teammates that help it succeed. Pokemon like Starmie, Tapu Fini, and Hatterene work well to stifle fighting types. Meanwhile, bulky water types like Suicune, Toxapex, and the aforementioned Tapu Fini often require a team effort to take down. Tyranitar's ability to not only succeed, but dominate in spite of those weaknesses is a credit to how easily it fits on nearly every team in every format that lets you use it. Covering for its few faults is well worth all the benefits it provides, like being one of the best ways to check Cresselia and Thundurus, who were historically 2 of the most impactful support Pokemon in doubles formats like the VGCs. My favorite Tyranitar set is all about countering support Pokemon. Buried in the annals of Generation 3 OU is a variation of Tyranitar known as TyraniBoah, a set meant to break the incredibly successful Skarmory and Blissey combination on its own. This is a mixed set that runs Focus Punch for Blissey, either an electric or fire type attack for Skarmory, and Substitute. The 4th move is dependent on what you want your Tyranitar to be able to check otherwise. Rock Slide and Ice Beam are helpful against Salamence, since it resists both fighting and fire type attacks. Hidden Power Grass is a good option against Swamperts, which makes this set able to check all 3 of the format's best defensive Pokemon. Then Crunch and Pursuit are good options against Gengar, Dusclops, and Claydol. Gen 3 OU can be a slog at times, with defense being incredibly powerful, so this wall breaker build of Tyranitar is pretty useful. I like to put TyraniBoah on Sun teams built around Sunny Day Exeggutor. It's probably not gonna win any tournaments, but I love using this combination. That segues nicely into the first question of the video. For the competitive players watching, what's an off-meta moveset or team combination that you really enjoyed using? I had a ton of fun in VGC 2015 with a team entirely designed around finding a way for Donphan to be effective. Donphan's always been one of my favorite Pokemon, but historically not that good in doubles, so finding a role for it was awesome. I love that team more than almost any other team I've ever built. For the non-competitive players, who's your favorite Rock-type Pokemon? Mine is Onix, because when 7-year-old me pulled this card out of his first pack of Pokemon cards, he thought he was looking at the coolest thing ever. There is something inherently awesome about a giant snake made out of boulders. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like and hit the subscribe button. Sharing it with your friends is also a great idea, as is following me on Twitter so you don't miss a future upload, because YouTube can be pretty finicky about it. I have more Pokemon videos in the works, but in the meantime, you can check out the ones I've already made on Zapdos and Skarmory. I also made a big video on Pokemon Type Wild, the legendary fan-made Pokemon fighting game from 2006. In it, I explore how new roster additions would play in a 2D fighter. Pokemon like Tentacruel, Hatterene, and the subject of this video, Tyranitar. My goal for April is to get up a new video every Saturday looking at a different indie fighting game to celebrate Indie Fighting Game Fest midway through the month. These will be shorter videos and also give me time to work on a big video I've got planned on fighting type Pokemon. Why they used to be terrible competitively and why they aren't anymore. Anyways, peace.